Welcome to day 2 of the GPCoE Energy Conference. I am Kimberly McSparron. I'm the program manager. Sorry, Kyle. I'm the program coordinator. I tried to do your job. So we only have a half a day today, but we've got a lot packed into that time. And so let's get started. We have got Brent Wheelbarger doing our professional development training this morning. He is with Trifecta Communications, and I think he's got some activities to get everybody involved. I am listed on the agenda only because of my 22 years of experience in human resources, but I am not probably going to be saying anything. We've also got Ron Butts, who's an HR guru, and he's here to assist Brent with anything he needs, but I think I'm just going to hand it over right now to Brent. Welcome.
So if you have any HR questions, Ron, not Brent. So I'm Brent Wheelbarger, and we're going to start with the first session of the day, so I hope you're copied and ready to go. Now, it's listed as Professional Development 101, but it's going to be with a twist. And here's the twist. If we think about everything that's been happening here yesterday and today, and we get right down to the kernel of what is it really about, I think that we can honestly say that everything everyone is doing here, it really does come down to innovation. And how are we learning to solve problems better and differently to address the challenges of the future? And that is really what this is about. And so for students that are here, and even for people that are in business that are here, or people that are working in the university setting, thinking about how to develop yourself to be an innovator, to come in with an innovator's mindset and recognize that this is the challenge of the 21st century, that the workforce needs people that can innovate and come up with ideas that are different than what we have had up until now. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to focus on innovation culture and innovation mindset. Innovation culture within the workplace and the innovation mindset that makes that culture possible. And so I know this is the first session. I know that you probably haven't had enough coffee yet, but I'm going to throw you to the dogs anyway. And we're going to start with an activity. And I know that's fingernails on a chalkboard to some of you at this hour. And in fact, it's even worse than that. It's not only is it an activity, it's a competition. A serious competition that we're going to have, and it's called the Marshmallow Challenge. Now, here's how this is going to work, and I promise this relates to innovation, so don't worry, it does relate. But what we're going to do, if you're ready, we're going to all get on teams. You can be at a table, but you're going to have to get on a team. Here's the rules. You have to leave the table you're at and go to another table, and get on a team at that table, and it needs to be 4 to 5 people at a table. And Kyle and some of the students maybe can help me. We're going to pass out a little brown bag to each table. So let's do that right now. Everybody hop up, find a team, get on, preferably people you don't know. That would be even better. Find a team of 4 to 5 people, huddle in at a table, and we will go around and pass out these magical little brown bags. So I'm going to give you about 20 more seconds. It's a speed round here. Quickly find the table. And they are bringing those bags around. All right, well everyone, congratulations. You've passed the first test. You found yourself a team. So don't open the bag yet. But I will tell you what's in there. In fact, it's up here on the screen. Inside your bag, there is 1 yard of string, there is 1 marshmallow, and there are 20 spaghetti sticks. And then in addition to that, they're bringing around, which you can just hang on a chair or on the side of your table, a yard of tape. So, however you want to manage the tape. So here's what's going to happen. When I say go, you are going to work together as a team at your table, and you're going to have, this says 10 minutes, but I'm dealing with a room of engineers and architects. So I feel like the expectation level should be a little higher. So you're going to have 5 minutes. You're not going to get 10 minutes. You're going to have 5 minutes. So in 5 minutes, your goal is to build the tallest structure you possibly can that will support the marshmallow at the top. So this is an engineering challenge that you're being tasked with this morning. As a team, your goal is to build the tallest tower that will support the marshmallow at the top. And I did bring a tape measure. So we can measure. Now I will only measure up to the marshmallow. So you can put stuff on top of it that won't count. It only goes to the height of the marshmallow. Now there is a prize. The team that builds the tallest tower. And it has to be self-standing. You cannot take the tower to the table. You can't lean it against anything. It's got to stand on its own. The team that builds the tallest tower, here's your prize. You will get to come up to the front and receive the praise and adulation of everyone in the room. And isn't that going to be fantastic? So, are we ready? Are we ready? On your mark, get set, go. table. Let's see, if you don't have a tower standing, you can sit down. If you have a tower standing, okay, we have, these guys are still working over here. They don't count. Okay, you have a tower, but she's holding it up. So, if I was here, please. Okay, now but see, their tower's still standing, and they're not, Are you the only tower that is still standing-ish? So, and these guys, they don't count, so they're still actively. Okay, everyone, if you guys stand up here, give these guys a hand. Their tower is now going into the coffee cup, but it's okay. It's okay. Good job. Good job. Did you come up with the name for your team? Is this team, what? You'll have to remember the name later. Okay. Team, we won. All right. Okay, everyone can have a seat. You can sit at the table you're at. You can go back where you were. It doesn't matter at this point, but everyone quickly regain your seat. Now, I'll give you just a second to get back. So there is actually a little rhyme behind the reason why we did this. This Marshmallow Challenge has actually been done. There's a nonprofit called Marshmallow Challenge, and they have done what you just did thousands of times all over the world with everyone from little kids to Fortune 500 executives. And we'll talk in a minute. We're going to come back to this. We're going to talk in a minute about the data they have gathered from doing this so many times in so many places with so many different types of people. And there's actually some things that were going on under the surface here that you may not realize. We'll talk about it in a minute. But what I want to do right now is dive into innovation. And so when I'm not working at Trifecta to help build virtual reality experiences for Dr. Bora, I actually work with help form a nonprofit called Kidvation. It's Kids and Innovation. And so we work with middle school students to teach them innovation skills and how to function like innovators. And over the past several years, working with kids in the area of innovation, I've had a couple of epiphanies about innovation and where it comes from and how to create it, how to foster it from interacting with these young people. And the first epiphany actually came from this book. It's called Innovator's DNA. If you've never read it, I would highly recommend getting a copy. It was created by Harvard Business Review, 2011. And if you haven't read it, here's the quick clip notes. The people that did this book basically went out and they did a survey of top performing CEOs around the world. CEOs that were driving incredible ROI through their leadership. Then they narrowed that group down further. And they narrowed it down to top performing CEOs who were achieving remarkable ROI through innovation, specifically. So the people that were using innovation to drive ROI. And then they narrowed that group down even further to the top 5% of those CEOs. So now we're talking about like the Steve Jobs of the world, the Bill Gates, those kind of people. And that was the group they focused on. The top 5% of top performing CEOs in the world who are specifically driving ROI for their investors from innovation. Not the CEOs that are selling the same widget over and over again for 10 years. These are the CEOs that are continually innovating on purpose. Those are the people they looked at. And then they tried to figure out what are these people doing that's different than what everybody else is doing in the world. And they came up with what they would call repeatable behaviors that, to a fault, every single one of them exhibited. To a fault. And so those repeatable behaviors, some of them, not all of them, but a few of them are what we're going to talk about today. What are these people doing that drives not only innovation for them personally, but innovation in a culture within their organization? Because in order for them to drive innovation and get ROI out of that the way that they are, it can't just be them. It has to be developing a culture within their workplace that causes that to happen. That was my first epiphany, that this is going on. And also, the other thing that they drew the conclusion of was this. These people are repeating behaviors. And one's ability to generate innovative ideas isn't merely a function of the mind. It doesn't just come from your genes, from your DNA, from whatever. It's actually a function of behavior. And if you can change your behaviors and begin to flex that innovation muscle that you all have, then you can actually improve your creative impact. This was the deduction that they made. So that was my first big epiphany, that anyone can be, you always think, well, Steve Jobs special, right? And he is special. But we can all be Steve Jobs, in a way. Not exactly the same. We can all exhibit innovative behaviors that actually drive greater impact. That was my first big epiphany. Now here's the second one, which is even bigger. And I don't want to tell you the second one just yet, I want to build into it. So we came across a study that was done back in the 1960s by a guy named George Land. And George Land was a psychologist. And he specialized, he had a firm that specialized in the psychology of creativity. How people psychologically become creative and think creatively. And so that was his whole deal. So in the 1960s, NASA contracted with him. Now you may recall in the 60s, NASA was involved in a project. Do you remember what project they were working on in the 1960s? Well, the big one, good point, which one? The big project was the Apollo moon program, right? They were trying to send things to the moon for the very first time. And if you watched any of the movies, you've read about this, there were some significant technological hurdles that NASA was trying to overcome. And it was difficult, and it was challenging, and they were struggling. And so what they did was they hired him to come in and create a creativity test that he could give to the top performing engineers at NASA. And they wanted to figure out who are the most divergent thinkers, who are the most innovative, creative thinkers amongst the engineering teams at NASA. They wanted to put them on teams specifically to tackle some of these really tough problems that they were trying to work around technically to make this program work. And so that's what he did. He came up with a creativity test. They gave it to the engineers at NASA. NASA never published who did well and who didn't. And it doesn't really matter because that's not what George Land is famous for. What he's famous for is what he did after that. He recognized that he could alter the test slightly and it would actually be applicable to pretty much anybody of any age to determine how creatively they think. It's not an IQ test, it's not an aptitude test, it's just a creativity test. How creative are you? And so that's what he did. He actually took his test, he changed it up slightly, and he gave it to roughly 1,300 5-year-olds in Head Start programs in the United States in the 1960s. 1,300 5-year-olds took his test. Now then he turned it into a longitudinal study. And when they turned 10, same kids, same test, he gave it to them again. And then he did it again when they turned 15. And he was able to chart and see. And then he took the test some years later, and he gave it to 360,000 28 to 30-year-olds to see how they did on this test. And so what he discovered is that there's a correlation between age and creativity. And he actually found that some people scored so high on this test, he had a category for them. He called them creative geniuses. And he's like, people that could score this kind of the test, he put them in a category called creative genius. And he found that creative geniuses do correlate a little bit to age. So of the 1,600 5-year-olds who took his test, if all 1,600 is 100%, what percentage of them do you think scored as creative geniuses on this test? Do you have any guesses? And the OSU students that have already been through this, don't say. Just write this down. Any guesses? 90%. He said 90%. Anyone care to refute that? Or we're just going to go with 90? Okay, you're actually on to something. According to Mr. Land, his test, 98% of the 5-year-olds scored in the creative genius category on his test. But this is what's interesting. Same test, same kids, now they're 10. 5 years later. Any guesses? He says 35% of 30. How many? 75. 75, do I have any up, down? 45. We have 40, 75 and 45. Well, if we were playing The Price is Right, you guys would be over there. It's actually 30%. That's a pretty big jump in 5 years. Same kids, same test.
Now the 15-year-olds. They're teenagers now. The weight of the world is starting to surround them a little bit. Any guesses on how the 15-year-olds did? We have 8%, 10%, 16%. Well, 15-year-olds, 12%. The 30-year-olds. Did we rebound when we became adults? We're comfortable in our own shoes now. We feel good about ourselves. We have a career. We're professionals. What do you think? He says 2%. We have a prophet in the room. 2%. Now, when you look at this, you're like, wow, that's super depressing. You know, it's like, first of all, there's some really interesting things about these numbers. The 5-year-olds and the 30-year-olds, they're inverse. So 98% of 5-year-olds scored as creative geniuses, and 98% of adults did not. Only 2% of the 5-year-olds were not in that category. 2% of the adults are. I find that fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So when you look at that, you're like, okay, what's going on here? Now here's my epiphany. Having worked with kids for a number of years, and then looking at research like this, it has become clear to me, and also looking at what the habits are, these repeatable behaviors that these uber innovative leaders in business are doing. The 2% at the bottom, which are those people are those 2%, are basically doing the same stuff that 98% of the 5-year-olds are doing. In a different way, but they're basically learning to think. They have managed to keep this, we'll call it a superpower, this creative superpower that these 5-year-olds have. Now, the 5-year-olds don't know how to apply it. They've got it, but they don't know what to do with it. These guys down here, not only did they keep it somehow, they figured out how to leverage it and use it to create incredible results. If you look at the ROI that Steve Jobs created for Apple from the time he came on as CEO for the second time until he passed away, it is incredible. Billions and billions of dollars in ROI he drove entirely through innovation. The 2% are basically doing what the 98% of the 5-year-olds do. So there's that. The other thing I will say, there are people that say, I can't be creative, I can't be innovative, it's not in me. If you're found yourself in a workplace, and they're like, we're going to be innovative, and we're going to have these ideas, and you're like, that's not me, that's not what I do, and I don't have it in my genes, this is not how I built, whatever. Well, the argument to those folks would be like, well, you did it one time. Maybe you don't anymore, but looking at this, it looks like you did it one time. We all did, we came out of the box that way. That's how we came into the world as creative thinkers. We maybe learned not to be creative over time, or the pressures of the world beat it out of us, but we were at one time, and you can be again. And so, the challenge is to learn to channel your inner 5-year-old. So what is it the 5-year-olds are doing, almost all of them, that almost none of the adults are doing, except those that are driving significant innovative ROI? What are they doing? Well, let me just tell you, it's not complicated. 5-year-olds are doing it, right? So it's not complicated, but here's the warning. As simple as these things are, they are terribly difficult for adults. Now, they're not hard for 5-year-olds, but they are tough for adults. So I want to start with the first one. Super simple. It's permission. Simply giving yourself permission, not only as an individual, if you're an employer, if you're a leader within a workspace, creating an atmosphere of permission for innovation to even have fertile ground, to even be a thing. And you might think, well, of course we all want innovation. We're going to get permission for that. But will you really? Is it really that easy? And I'm going to give you a story to just share how hard it is. And I consider myself a creative guy most of the time. But this quick story, so my daughter, she's in college now, but when she was 5 or 6, I would read to her in her room before she went to bed. And sometimes we didn't read books. Sometimes I see something on the news or a cool video on YouTube that we would do instead. And one night I found this video. This was back in 2005, 6, somewhere in there. Google had created a contest. Some of you may have heard of this, called the Google Lunar X Prize. No one ever won, by the way. It's never been won. But the prize, here was the competition. The first private team, it couldn't be a large corporation, it couldn't be a government. The first private team, mainly college students were the people that were competing, that could send a rocket to the moon of any size, land a rover on the moon of any size, drive it 500 meters, take a photo, and beam the photo back to Earth. The first team that could do that would win $20 million. Signed by Google. There you go. 20 million if you could do that. Simple, right? Well, and so there's this wonderful video with these teams from all over the world that were competing to win this prize. And they were doing it in wildly different ways. The teams from India and China and Japan and Australia and Canada and the United States, they were all competing in very different ways. And I thought it was a cool video, so I showed it to my daughter. Because I just wanted her to be inspired by just this innovative approach that people were taking. After the video, I asked her what she thought of it. And granted, it was 9 o'clock at night, I was tired, but I was completely unprepared for what she said. She responded in the classic 98% 5-year-old response. She said, "Yeah, Daddy, that was a cool video. I think we should enter it. You and I, we can win this thing. We can win the $20 million. We can build a rocket. We can send this rover. Daddy, we can do this." Classic 98% 5-year-old, right? So my response to her was classic 98% 30-year-old. So she said this. My response was, and her name was Emma. I said, "Emma, that's crazy." That's great. And then I began, I'm not a rocket scientist. You're a 6-year-old. How, how expensive, and I gave her all these reasons why this, and I was nice about it, but still, I gave her all these reasons why this was a ridiculous idea. And then I took her to bed, kissed her goodnight, turned the lights out, went in and told my wife what happened. And she laughed and she said, "Well, that's funny, Brent. I figured you'd get a bit down for something like that." And then in that moment, it hit me what I did. As the classic 98% 30-year-old, I withheld permission. Now, not permission to do it, because we weren't going to do it. Okay, let's be clear. We were not going to build a rocket. Send it to the moon. I withheld permission to even talk about it, to even think about it, even allow it to share brain space between us. I just completely withheld permission because I viewed it as impractical and not something that we would actually be able to do. So I just, no, we're not going to even talk about it. Imagine how rich that conversation could have been if I just gave permission to even discuss it. We may not have built a rocket, but maybe we would have done a really cool science fair project or something as a result of the conversation. Giving permission to do these things is so powerful and yet so hard because everything inside of us often tells us it's impractical, it doesn't make sense, we're not going to do this. We have other things to do, right? So we don't. Now there's something else going on as it relates to permission, and it's the way that 2% of adults and 98% of 5-year-olds think. And when you're dealing with a challenge or a problem or an issue, there's 2 ways to take it on. There's divergent thinking and convergent thinking. And both of them are important, by the way, but they're very different. So divergent thinking is lots of ideas, no judgment, the more the better. Your classic brainstorming session. You guys have all been to one of those probably. Bring the ideas on. No judgment. Convergent thinking is different. It's a deeper kind of thinking. We're going to narrow down ideas. We're going to be judgmental. We're going to start to categorize things, combine things together. We're going to be a little more critical about the ideas. And eventually we're going to try to focus in, because we can't do everything, we're going to focus in on a few ideas that we think are viable. Dr. Land, actually, the guy that did the psychology study, he actually refers to this as the brake and the accelerator. So imagine divergent thinking is like the accelerator on a car. You hit the gas, man, we want ideas. Ideas are currency. Every idea is a piece of gold. We want as many as we can get. Good, bad, ugly, pretty, doesn't matter. Bring the ideas on. And convergent thinking is like the brake. Let's slow down the ideas now and let's start to think about it. And what are we going to do with these ideas? Now, they're both important. The 5-year-old is naturally incredible at divergent thinking. 5-year-olds are divergent thinkers. They will come up, you come to a brainstorming session, man, you will get everything in the world. If you did a brainstorming session with 5-year-olds, and you were like, I'll come back to it. I'll come back to it. So that's the 5-year-old. 5-year-olds are not that great at convergent thinking, though. I figured that out. They are not good at narrowing down and let's get down to it. The adults are better at that. Here's the problem with adults. And here's what we do in the workplace. We use the brake and the accelerator at the same time. We're trying to do them both at once. and it creates incredible dysfunction when it comes to innovation. So this is what that looks like. We were into a brainstorming session. You got the whiteboard up here, you got the guy with the Sharpie marker, you got everybody in the room, and you're like, okay, we gotta have some ideas, we gotta increase sales by 10% next month, or we're going out of business. What do you guys got? And you want all the ideas up on the board, right? And someone in the room raised their hand and they said, oh, well, what about this idea? And the guy's like, okay, and he gets ready to write it up there, and before he gets it on the board, someone else in the room says, oh, no, we tried that 2 years ago, it didn't work. And the guy up here is like, oh, okay, then I won't write it up there. And then someone else says something, and they get ready to write it up there, and then someone says, oh, that's going to be really expensive, and we don't have the budget for that. There's no way that's too expensive. Oh, okay, then I won't write it up there. And it's like the ideas are coming to the board, and as they're on their way, someone shoots a missile that knocks them out of the sky before they ever get to the board. And so the ideas never get on the board. And some of them may be ridiculous and impractical and expensive, and maybe they didn't work last year and so on. But if you were sitting in this room, if you were a bunch of 5-year-olds, and I said, let's do the Google Lunar X Prize, come up with ideas to send a rocket to the moon. 5-year-olds, they will get divergent on you. Let me tell you. They will come up with things like, let's have a stagecoach and horses take it to the moon. Let's do that. And the adults will say, I'm not writing that up there. That's ridiculous. We're not going to, horses can't even breathe in space. How is that going to happen? And it would not get written up there. But my advice to you would be, write it up there. If the 5-year-old sitting in the room and says, let's take the stagecoach or horses to send the thing to the moon, write it on the board, because this is what happens. We're not going to take a stagecoach to the moon. But imagine that's on the board along with 100 other ideas. And then someone says, how are we going to pay for these things? We got to fund this whole initiative. And someone says, looking at the board, getting inspiration, says, isn't a stagecoach and horses the logo for Wells Fargo? My brother works at Wells Fargo. He's a VP there. Maybe I should call him and see if they might be willing to fund this expedition. And we'll paint the stagecoach and horses on the side of the rocket with their logo. In a way, a stagecoach and horses is taking this rocket, taking to the moon. You know, I mean, it actually could create a connection point, a dot connection, that wouldn't have happened possibly if it hadn't been written up there. So, divergent, convergent thinking, use the accelerator first, and then use the brain. That's a key thing for innovation. And it comes back to permission. That's how the 5-year-olds give themselves permission. They're willing to be divergent and just go with it. And then the adults can bring it down into focus. But if we never give ourselves permission to think about it, it's not going to happen. Now we come back to the spaghetti, the marshmallow challenge. Now, this is another really powerful example of the 5-year-old mentality and the innovator mentality versus our normal mentality. These people, as I mentioned, have done this thing all over the world. What you just did today, they've done it everywhere. And they have collected a tremendous amount of data on how people do it and who does it well and who doesn't. Now, the good news is, many of you are engineers and architects in here. You would be removed from their census because you always do better than everybody else. So congratulations, if you're an architect or an engineer, you generally do it well. So if we take you out of the census for a minute, and we just focus on everybody else in the world, there is a niche group of people that tend to do this challenge really, really terrible. There is a group that just does it awful. And there's also a niche group of people who do this exceptionally well, according to the data of these people that do this everywhere. And if you were a bookie in Vegas, you would always put your money on these guys and never on these guys. And here's who they are. The people who do it great, well actually, people who do it terrible. We'll start with that. The ones who are just awful at the Marshmallow Challenge, MBA students. Masters of Business students are just the worst at this. The people, according to their data, that do this the best, kindergartners. So, continuing to corroborate my theory about the innovative thinkers. So it sounds very counterintuitive, right? But here's what's actually going on. The MBA students, you had 5 minutes because you're engineers and architects, right? But normally, the civilians in the world, they get 10 minutes to do this. So you've got 10 minutes, you're the MBA students. You're sitting around. The first thing that they have to determine is hierarchy. Who's in charge? Who do we blame if this doesn't work? You know, right? That's where we begin. And once they've frittered away a little bit of time on that, the time is ticking, right? Then they set to work thinking thinking through the best way to build a tower on planet Earth, ever. The best way ever to build this tower. Nothing will be left to chance. This will be the best tower. It will hold the marshmallow higher and better than any tower that has ever been built, and we will get this totally specced out. Then we will build it. And now they've got about 8 minutes in, and now they're going to build a tower that they have determined is the best tower ever to do this. And they build a tower, but they almost always make a critical error. They underestimate how heavy a marshmallow is. It feels so light and fluffy in your hand, but to it, spaghetti sticks, it's a ton of bricks, as you all witnessed today. It's very heavy. And then this tower that was going to be the best tower ever to accomplish this task falls down. And now they've got 2 minutes left. And they've got to somehow rally. And now everyone's pointing fingers at the person that was determined to be in charge, and this is your fault, and how did this not work? And now they got to try to get this thing built back again, and it just turns into a big disaster, and it's over. The 5-year-olds, the kindergartners, they knew how heavy the marshmallow was within 2 minutes. Why? Because they just started doing it. They started iterating. So they just built something up and then it fell down. Whoops, let's do it again. They built it up again and it fell down. They built it up again and they probably built it 5, 6, 7 times. By the time the MBA students had just built it once. Because they were comfortable with the idea that if it falls down, it's okay, we'll just build it again. And we'll learn as we go. They don't know they're learning as they go, but they are. That's what they're doing. And so by the time they get to 8 minutes, they know exactly what's going to make the tower stand tall because they've tried it a whole bunch of ways and it didn't work. And so what it ends up showing is this interesting relationship that we have with failure. And people will say, failure is great. Failure is how you learn. And it is in many ways. But not all failure is great. Some failures will burn your house down. And that is not a failure you want to learn from, right? You don't want to learn, oh, well, I'll make sure not to burn my house down next time we do this. You know, those are bad failures. There are good failures and bad failures. And so here's the relationship that innovators have with failure. Fail early, fast, and cheap. Don't fail when it's a catastrophic disaster that's going to bankrupt you and you have no recourse. Fail early, fast, and cheap. The 5-year-olds are okay with failing early. Here's the problem for the MBA students. They do not differentiate between catastrophic failure and productive failure. To them, failure is failure, that's it. And we will not have any failure. And so they work so hard to mitigate any failure that they actually do themselves a disservice. They can't figure out what actually works and what doesn't because they're so afraid and terrified of failure that then they set themselves up for a catastrophic failure. When the tower falls down and you only have 2 minutes left, that's a catastrophic, that's an expensive failure, right? You've only got 2 minutes left. If the tower falls down 2 minutes in, that's a cheap failure. And you can recover from that. You can do it again and again and eventually figure it out. So learning to fail early, fast, and cheap is a hallmark of all of these innovative CEOs. They tried things, didn't work, they tried it again, but they didn't bet the whole farm on it. They just did iterative steps. So if you're going to develop a new product, maybe do an MVP first, an ugly prototype, something to figure out proof of concept, do some market research, before you spend $2 million and determine nobody wants it. You know what I mean? That's the difference there. So moving along, ideas. Often people think ideas come from this magic cloud in the sky. And it's like, you know, the whole poof and the light bulb moment, and there's the idea that just came out of nowhere. Ideas do not come out of nowhere. Ideas come from somewhere. And when we deal with students, we actually call them imagination dots, is where we tell students ideas come from. And we've actually categorized them into 4 categories: people, experiences, information and data, and existing ideas. This is where ideas come from. New ideas, innovative ideas. People. Every single person you meet is a resource. They are currency, in a sense. Think about most authors who write novels, base so many of the characters on people they know. People that live down the street, their family, their old school teacher, whoever. They lean on them as a resource. All the experiences and things of those people can be your experiences simply by asking them questions, being inquisitive and talking to them. Experiences. And we like to say to the students in particular, not just the good experiences, not the Disneyland moments. They can be sources of innovation and ideas, but oftentimes it's the bad experiences. It's the stuff that was not good. Because that's a point of problem. That's a problem that needs to be solved. And you identify it by having a bad experience. And so trying to understand that life is full of good and bad experiences, and both of them are learning moments. And then information and data, and then existing ideas lead to new ideas. And I'd love to give the example, I'm going to date myself here a little bit for some of you younger folks. The older folks will probably remember Napster. Right? Remember Napster back in the turn of the century? They had this really terrible idea that they were going to give away music. They were going to steal music and give it away for free. Not a great idea. But they were very early in understanding the potential for digital music distribution. They just had a really bad idea of how to do it. So Apple comes along and says, that's a terrible idea to just steal music and give it away. People are going to go to jail, and they did, over that. But what if you just charge 99 cents a song, put it on a really easy-to-use platform, and marry it with a beautiful device that will let you put 1,000 songs in your pocket, which was the iPod back in the day. And they took that really terrible idea, married it with a few other things, and created a multi-billion-dollar idea. There are no useless ideas. There are bad ideas, and there are good ideas, and there are so-so ideas, but none of them are useless. Even bad ideas can lead to good ideas. So keep in mind, this is where they come from. Now you would think this is where we can trounce the 5-year-olds, right? The adults in the room can win in this because we know more people, we know we have way more experiences, we should dominate in the imagination category over the 5-year-olds who don't have all this repertoire, and yet we don't. They still beat us here. And this is what? 5-year-old, it comes down to a word. And if you're an adult and you spend any amount of time with a 5-year-old, it's an infernal word. It's a word that you rue after a certain point. And it's white. Daddy, why is the sky blue? I don't know why the sky is blue. Why don't you know, Daddy? Well, I guess maybe they didn't do that in school. Why didn't they teach you that in school? I don't know either. It's time to, it's like, we don't have time to talk about this. And they will ask you why, about why is the chair silver? Someone painted it that color. Why isn't it silver without being painted? I don't know. It's like they will ask why about everything. And what it is an exemplar of their innate curiosity. And I like to say that you do not have to train a 5-year-old to be curious. You can train them not to be curious, but you do not have to train them to be curious. They come out of the box that way. That's how they were made. When they come into the world, they are curious. It's how they learn and grow. The problem is, for adults, it's hard for us to naturally be curious in the same way that 5-year-olds are. In the Innovators DNA book, they identified this as one of the #1 traits of the top-performing innovative CEOs, is that they have trained themselves, because it isn't natural. When we get to a certain age, we have priorities, we have goals, we have jobs, we have things we have to get done, and we get into tunnel vision, and everything around us becomes wallpaper, except the things we have to do. It's just the way the world hits us. It doesn't hit the 5-year-old that way. But these people, these 2%, they have trained themselves to continue to be curious in a world where people have stopped being curious. And that has made all the difference, because they ask questions. If you go with one of those 2% to a dinner party, they will ask so many questions, and they will say very little about themselves. They will go up and they will want to know about you, and they will want to know about you, and what country are you from, and where did you grow up, and what did you do here? And they will ask all kinds of things, not even necessarily related to whatever the dinner party is about. They just are very curious. And so channeling that and figuring out, now because this is so not the way we do things as adults, we have to give ourselves some hacks, some ways to help. So there's a thing called generative theory, which was created by a guy named Robert Epstein, and he basically said there are certain things you can do to help spur your curiosity, to help drive innovative thought. And one of them is to purposely seek out challenging tasks. I know that's not what you want to hear, but doing things that are hard because they're hard actually does things to your brain. If you're naturally a mathematician, try go writing a novel. that's going to be hard for you. If you like to write novels, try to go do hard math, you know what I mean? And but yet, maybe you should, because it starts to create these neurological changes in your brain that begin to activate certain areas. And so that's one of the things. Broaden your knowledge on purpose. It's going to sound a lot like college, but try to take classes that aren't necessarily in your major, just to begin to diversify your thought. And if you're an adult, go to conferences like this that may not actually be in your field, just to see what's going on out there in the world, what's happening around me, and maybe there's going to be crossover. Maybe there isn't, but still, surround yourself with interesting things and people. There was a study done that if you set a person in a cubicle in an office, and there was nothing in there, just a cubicle, and you tried to chart how creatively they're able to think and how well they're even able to work, it changes dramatically when they just put 2 pictures of their families in the cubicle. And it changes even more if you add a plant. And it changes even more if they leave the cubicle and go on a walk in the woods. You know, then it's like through the roof. So surrounding yourself on purpose with interesting things and people, and then actively capturing your new ideas. This last one, the 2%, the innovative CEOs that are driving incredible ROI, they are what you would call idea hoarders. They hoard them. And they put them in a place where they can access them handily. They hoard them, they organize them, and they have a mechanism, they have a process to capture these ideas and be able to refer to them later. And for students we work with, we call it imagination book, we call it journal. It can be a book you can take with you everywhere you go. And when you see something that inspires you, you get an idea that gives me an idea for something, you're going to write it down. It doesn't have to be a book though. I actually don't use a book. I use a Trello book. If you ever use, I don't know if anyone's ever used Trello, it's like a little organizational chart thing you use to organize your whatever. Anyway, I use a Trello board. If I read an article in National Geographic and I find it interesting, I snap a picture of it and I put it on my Trello board. If I see a conference that looks interesting to me, I take it, put it on my Trello board. If I see a quote, put it on my Trello board. If I have an idea for something, I put it on my Trello board. And it's become a habit. It's a repeatable habit that I do over and over again, very consistently. I'm still working on it. It's hard sometimes because I forget. But these people that are driving significant innovation, they do this maniacally. It has become a cornerstone of their life and how they function. Now, imagine if you had a workplace where you were giving people permission, you were letting them share ideas in an open and free environment where they weren't going to be judged, at least not at first. You know, they would have the opportunity to share. You were drawing on all these resources you have around you that most people ignore and adding them into the conversation. This is when things get really interesting. It's called dot connection. The imagination dots start to connect. And you can make them connect, you can purposefully look for ways to connect them. But here's the fun thing. When you're doing all this stuff, they start to connect magically without you even knowing it. And I want to share a short video that I think does a great job. It's about 2 minutes of explaining this concept. It's actually a commencement speech that Steve Jobs gave at the university that he ended up not graduating from. But he gives this talk about how and he didn't call it imagination dot, that's my term, but how these dots can connect magically, sometimes without you even realizing it's happening. But it's because you exercise discipline to do these things. This can be a result that happens almost organically. So hopefully this will play.
And much of what I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on. Let me give you one example. Reed College at that time offered perhaps the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label on every drawer was beautifully hand calligraphed. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in my life. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. And we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them. If I had never dropped out, I would have never dropped in on that calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust that something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever, because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path, and that will make all the difference.
So basically what he's saying is, take advantage of these behaviors, be curious, do these things, and trust that they will do their work. That the innovation will come if you simply do these things, which is exactly what the Innovator's DNA book is saying as well. If you'll exercise these behaviors, the creative impact will be greater. Now the final thing I'll share before we close out here is a last little tidbit from the 5-year-olds. There are 3 magic words that if you say to a 5-year-old, they can put anything on the other end of those 3 words and they become real to them in a very powerful way. And those are, let's pretend that. Let's pretend that. And then put anything you want on the other side. Let's pretend that you're a police officer and I'm a bank robber. Go. Right? If you do that to a 5-year-old, if I go to a 5-year-old and say, I'm a bank robber, you're a police officer, it's incredible. Their brain instantly goes into this mode where in real time they are concocting a narrative that they will act it out. They will tell you this whole thing that's happening with no knowledge of law enforcement, no knowledge of what it takes to rob a bank, and they will just do this. And in real time, it's coming out, and their ability to project this out is incredible. Now, if we do it with adults, and I go to someone and say, hey, you're a police officer, I'm a bank robber, go, an adult's going to be like, I really don't have any kind of background in law enforcement, so I don't really know anything about that, and so this is probably not going to be a good idea. This is over. And we can't do it the same way. But if you can harness this ability to use this, especially in a business setting, let's pretend that we actually hit our sales goal. What will that look like for our company? Let's pretend like we double our sales goal. What will that look like for our company? And visualize it. Put it on paper, draw a picture, whatever, but come up with what will that look like. And then, what would it actually take to do that? To get there. Let's give ourselves permission to just think about it. What would it involve? And so, using this technique to be able to say, let's project into the future, paint a picture, and then work backwards from there and see how we can make this a reality. It's one of those traits that those high-performance innovators all exhibit. So, with all of that in mind, and this just scratches the surface. If you really want to go deeper, you could be a 5th grader and come to a Kidnation class. I will leave you with a quote that I think summarizes all of this really well. And it's a quote that was said, and we're going to bookend this with the space program in the 1960s. In 1969, Neil Armstrong has landed on the moon. He's coming out of the capsule. And the quote is not the one you think I'm going to say, the one small step. It's a quote that was actually said by the administrator of NASA, Wernher von Braun, who was in mission control, watching on the screen as this was happening. And he's coming up the step. And Wernher von Braun turned to someone standing next to him. And keep in mind, in 1969, landing on the moon, it's proven to be fairly difficult for us today to get things to land on the moon correctly. 1969, this was crazy town. We're doing something. And he said, I have learned to use the word impossible with great caution. And I love this quote. I've learned to use the word impossible with great cost. The moment we label something impossible, we remove permission to even talk about it. Because it's impossible, so why should we even discuss it? He's basically saying we should be very careful about the things that we label as impossible. As he sat there and watched the impossible happen in front of him. This, I think, really summarizes the whole deal. What Wunderbaum Ron was basically saying is, we should learn to think like 5-year-olds, because they rarely ever label anything impossible. Daddy, we could go send a rocket to the moon and win $1 million. That's how they think. So I'll leave you with this as a point of caution, but also of inspiration, that creating a workplace where we don't naturally label things as impossible, we learn to exercise these behaviors, we share that with our employees, we give them an environment that's safe to do that in, and then as a person that works in that environment, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, and getting into that and thinking about things that are hard and difficult and challenging, and recognizing that things that might seem impossible now may not be in the future, and maybe we can be the drivers to make that happen. And I love telling that to you guys, because everything I heard yesterday, that's exactly what you're doing. So, congratulations on your work, and let's continue to drive it forward, and go grab some more coffee, because I'm done.